Yes. Tina, thank you for being here. I heard that song in the movie, The Greatest Showman. Is that where it came from, right? Yes, it did. And The Greatest Showman is a show about P.T. Barnum, who puts together a group of misfits, according to society, misfits, and they come together and they become his act, which becomes very popular in New York City. The idea was that he had a museum that he had finagled. Interesting way he got it was 10 ships of the shipping company went down in the ocean, and they lost everything, and the company folded. And he was a clerk. He happened to have the deed to those 10 ships on his desk. So he took them and went to the bank and used them as collateral. Since the bank didn't know, they were at the bottom of the ocean, and they gave him the money to start his business, which was a failure because it was not exciting enough. So they ended up, he went out in the streets of New York, and he found the people who were unusual to look at. Either they were really tall or really short or really wide, or bearded women or extra strong men, or some other quality that most people weren't used to seeing. And he brought them all together in one place, and that became the exciting part of his museum, and that grew into P.T. Barnum's fame, right? That was how it started. And the song is of these people who were outcast by society. It's a musical, and they sing this song as they dance around and prove that they're as good as anybody, right? And that's the song. Now, I'd like to relate that to my talk a little bit. Through this story, I want to tell you of what I just did. So I was just in California. In California, I went on March 12th, which was Monday, and flew in, and Nancy and I got a car, and we drove to Modesto, California, where Royal Robbins Memorial was being conducted. Now, some of you, I know, have Royal Robbins clothing. But before he was known as Royal Robbins the clothier, he was Royal Robbins the rock climber. And in my era of my early 20s, it was just after his era of fame, he was the biggest name in rock climbing probably in the world, because Yosemite was the center of rock climbing of the world, and he was the king of Yosemite. And if you know the iconic big walls of Yosemite, the biggest is El Cap. The second biggest is Half Dome. Half Dome is 2,000 vertical feet, and he was the first guy to climb a big wall like that. It had never been done anywhere, and he was the first guy to do it. He led a group of 2 other guys. It solidified his fame as the man in the valley. And this man I met many years later, 20-some years later, as a kayaker. We kayaked together. We did first descents in both North America and South America together. And so his wife asked me to be the MC of his memorial, which had 500 people there, only because she only let in 500 people. And these were the paparazzi of their era would have been all over this, because these were the names of climbing in America at the time, and were like the core of rock climbing exploration in their generation. One of the men that was there, and one of the last to speak, was Yvon Chouinard. Now, some of you know Yvon Chouinard not as a climber, but as the guy who started Patagonia, the clothing company, the one that has the small label that says Patagonia on it. So, this is not a fashionista experience there. Almost nobody has a jacket on except for a couple of us, and I felt like I had to dress up a little bit to be, even in that crowd, you got to distinguish yourself, if you're the MC, so I did. But Chenard, the man of the living legends that were there, the biggest legend that were there, he comes up and he has tree-torn tennis shoes on. Now, I don't think they made tree-torns for about 20 years, right? He's got some blue jeans or some other well-worn clothing. None of it has Patagonia on it, as it's often known here as Prepagonia, right? So he doesn't have any of his clothing, and he's just kind of like, looked like he walked off the beach, really. He gets up there. Now, Chenard comes up to my chin. He's not a big guy. He's also 80 years old. And he could care less what you think of him, right? He's also part of a group that put together 10 million, that's a big M, acres of land in Patagonia, southern tip of South America and Chile, and they turned it into gave it to the governments as a national park. 10 million acres, 4 times the size of Yellowstone. Big gift, biggest ever in the history of the world, private gift of land to a government. So, this is the man that comes up to speak. And what he says is, we didn't ever expect this. We were dirtbaggers, meaning they had no money, they slept on the ground, and all we wanted to do was climb. That's all we wanted to do. We didn't trust anybody who did anything else. As a matter of fact, Royal had a girlfriend and he read. We didn't trust him at all, right? All we wanted to do was climb. Now, you think about this. If you have been able to give or be part of a group that gave the biggest amount of land ever to a government, 10 million acres, I don't care where those acres are, they got to cost something. That's a lot of land. That's a lot of property. That's a lot of money. And if you know Patagonia, the clothing, all of it's twice what it would be in anybody's other label. It's just, he's done very well by himself. But he got there how? Not by following the route of going to school, getting an MBA, doing what your boss tells you to do, and finally achieving success by incremental stages. No, he did it this way. He was a climber who slept in the dirt, who didn't have any money, who stole from Safeway to get food on occasion. He was that guy. He was the one that the Park Service thought was a renegade, and they didn't like. He was like Jesus, a renegade, not your typical Jewish good boy. Jesus comes into the city of Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, as the story is told. And when you read the Gospels, let me just say one thing. These Gospels were not contemporaneously written. They were written years afterwards. And the Gospel of Luke, which is one that has a very good description of this, was written somewhere between 60 and 100 years after Jesus' death. And they didn't have a tape recorder. So you can imagine they made up a bunch of it. They tried to take the sayings of Jesus, put it together in a coherent story that made sense to profess Jesus as the Messiah. That was the purpose. So read it as a dream, not as a fact, not as a factoid, like we would expect from a newspaper today. Read it as though it was an interior experience for you. So when you read this story, you see yourself, put yourself in the place of the primary characters in the story, and then it becomes real, more real than it would be if you were looking for facts. So consider yourself on this donkey riding into Jerusalem with prescience about what's going to happen in the next 7 days. Imagine this is you. You're on this donkey. People love you. They are throwing down their cloaks in front of you, and everything is going so well, right? Have you ever been there? When everything is going so well, and yet you know You're doing what you have to do, and things are going to be interesting. In other words, another word, interesting is another word for difficult. So coming back to my experience in California, Royal Robbins, this man among men who climbed mountains and was where fear was common and suffering was part of it. He said of his climbing, I know I'm going to do it. I may suffer, but I'm going to do this. In the Jewish tradition, there's a word for a man like this, and it's called mitch. He was a mitch. He was the toughest, most strong-willed of all the people in the valley, full of strong-willed people. He was royal, just as his name, and he made his ideals, the ideals became the ideals of the community, and they climbed clean, which means they stopped destroying the rock as they climbed it, which they used to do with pitons. So they put up a new way of protecting themselves. This is Royal's idea of how to do it. Do it with elegance. Do it with style. Do it even though you suffer. That's Royal. It's also Jesus. Comes into the city. He's on the donkey, which doesn't mean he was humble. It means he was a king of peace, is what that means. A horse would mean he was a king of war. So he comes in as a peaceful king, riding on a donkey, and so might you. Imagine yourself riding into the city on the donkey as a messenger of peace, and you come into that world. Now, the gospel writer of Luke has an interesting way of introducing this story. Here's the story. I'll tell it more quickly than he does. 3 servants of an unlike king are given a talent. One is given 10 talents, which means a lot of money. One is given 5 talents, which still means a lot of money. One is given 1 talent, which is a pretty good sum of money. And he says, I'm coming back later. I want you to invest it and give me the rewards when I come back. First one takes his 10 talents, he makes 10 more. And so the king makes him over 10 cities. The second one, 5 talents, makes 5 more. He says, you can have 5 cities. The third one says, I was afraid. I knew you were a tough guy. So I just hid it in the ground. And this infuriates the king. He says, why don't you at least stick it in the bank? Because you didn't do that. Take his money from him and give it to the guy with 10 talents. Right? Tough story. It's not even the end of the story. This peaceful king in the Gospel of Luke, the chapter before, the very verses before says, and all those people who didn't like me, kill them all. That's a Jesus story for you. Coming back to you, you're on the donkey. You're a person of peace. You know it may not go well. You may have to suffer. And the question then is, what will you do? Will you hide your light under a bushel basket and not suffer so much, thinking you're going to play it safe? Or will you invest your life and you get 5 talents, and maybe you will be 5 times greater than you were before, or 2 times greater? Or will you take your 10 talents and you make 10 more? Right? This is what the story's about. Jesus is going into Jerusalem. This sets up the story of Jesus going into Jerusalem. And it says he had the 10 talents. I'm going to interpret now. Here's my dream's interpretation. He's coming into the city. He knows he's going to get crucified. He knows he's going to be betrayed by his people. He knows because he is Jesus. He knows this stuff ahead of time. He proclaims it's going to happen ahead of time. He walks into it knowing it because though he may suffer, he is planting his 10 talents as the best way he knows how to bring about the kingdom of heaven as he has declared it over his lifetime. He takes the step. He sacrifices himself in the pursuit of something bigger than himself. He is bringing forth from within himself his true essence at a cost, yes, but he did it. Now, do you remember any of the scribes and Pharisees by name? I mean, they are written down right in there. Occasionally, we don't remember them. We barely remember Pilate just because he had a really good speaking part. But generally, we don't remember anybody. Couldn't name all 12 of the disciples without a lot of time and effort on my part. I mean, but we remember this guy who took his 10 talents and made 10 more. Right? That's the guy you remember. Not the one who buries his talents in the ground and plays it safe. He loses all of it. Now coming back to us and the story I had of this memorial. So here we are. We got this guy, this little short guy. Did I tell you that the Yvonne Chenard only comes up to my chin? This little short 80-year-old guy. He just gave enough money to buy what? A few million acres of property? He took his 10 talents and he made 10 more. He took his dirtbag lifestyle, converted it into millions of dollars, not because he did what everybody told him to do, not because he played it safe, but because he absolutely never played it safe. He went for it, sun up to sundown. And how did he know what he was supposed to go for? It's what he wanted to do. It's what you want to do is what you should do. With gusto, like you mean it. Though you may suffer in the process. And don't be so afraid of suffering, because if you are afraid of suffering, you bury your talent in the ground and you get your butt kicked by the king at the end. This is not a good way to do it. There's a saying in the Gospel of Thomas. I never seem to be able to get this without a little help. Let me just read it to you. If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. Take your pick. Right? We're convinced by everyone that loves us generally, to play it safe. Your parents, your friends. Right? They've done a good job, and they did so because they wanted to take care of you. And they wanted you to be happy. And they wanted you to have a life long enough to get what most people get in life. They wanted you to have all that. And so they really did a good job of convincing us we should be cautious and not really follow our dreams too far, or we may not be successful. Is that true? Is that sort of how it goes? As a parent, you do your best to protect your kids. Right? You should. It's inevitable. Every bear does it up to a point. Every bird does it up to a point. At some point, they have to kick them out of the nest or push them off into new territory. Same is true for us. If we are to be the bear, the bird, the being that we are called to be, we need to take that bold step of being just who we wanted to be. Your success lies there. That's where you're called to be. That's why you're unique. That's why you have the only face like yours ever. The only history like yours ever. You're absolutely special. Now, P.T. Barnum found these people, and most of them were having a miserable life. When he found the people that society said, oh, you don't fit in really well. And he gathered them together, and they became special. And they lived in their specialness. That's where their success was, not in hiding it, not in burying it in the ground. So we're kind of a mixture, almost all of us are a mixture of doing what we want to do, what we are called to do, and also trying to protect ourselves from harm. Right? There are smart ways of going about it and stupid ways of going about it, granted. But I have this sneaking suspicion that most of us could release the hounds and we would do better, not worse. We could be all that we wanted to be and take more of the lumps that come with that and be more satisfied and perhaps even more successful before the day's over. You could be, as Linda said, laughing a lot more. Every day could be more fun because you went for it. Just before we left California, I was having breakfast with some of my old boatman friends. By and large, the boatmen that I hung out with were pretty smart guys, granted. pretty affable guys, too. Most of them retired at age 50 after taking the first 30 years of their lives to do exactly what they wanted to do. From different directions, they made their fortune. Because they were used to doing it. Not thinking about it, not talking about it, but doing it, whatever it was. And they had nothing to lose because they didn't have any money. They were dirtbaggers too, right? Think about it. Are we playing too cautious? Are we living small when we could live large? Are we being afraid to put on funny clothes that suit our taste because not everybody would understand? Or to tell a joke that most people would think was, that's out there, and so we don't tell it? Are we just trying to come in under the radar? I confess, yes, I have, quite a bit. But if Jesus had done that, known what was coming in Jerusalem, and said, you know, I really think the south of France sounds better to me. If Royal Robbins had done it, if Yvonne Chouinard had done it, you know, we wouldn't have 2 clothing lines and 2 more heroes in our quiver. Would have been different. But they took a chance. They stood out. They did what they wanted to do. Now there will be hundreds of us that will do what we want to do, and no one will notice. And you don't have to be noticed. But there'll be a deep inner satisfaction that says, I followed my own compass. I took my shot at being myself instead of my shot of looking like what other people thought I should be like. What a trip that would be. May not see you next week. So maybe I'll take this back a little bit. You know, maybe I should dial it down. What would happen if everybody went off and did what they wanted to? Like, what if everybody became a Christ this week? You know, I doubt you'd be in the temple next week. You'd be out there, right? There's a risk in everything we do. And the biggest risk is not being ourselves. Playing small inside our own minds to protect ourselves from being hurt. Take your lumps. They might be big. They might really be bruising. Ultimately, it's your life. If you wish to be the Christ of your generation, you can't do it by denying your own special gifts and hiding them. Only by bringing them out will you be saved, will we be saved. And by hiding them, so much the less. Yesterday there was a march. What was it called? March for Our Lives. I heard an interview of one or two of them on the radio. And the one I heard that I remember the best is this, I think this boy's in high school. And he said, our opponents may not believe, may not join us, but we will succeed when they are dead, if necessary. They're old, we're young, we're the future. Right? Steve Jobs said the same thing. Years ago, someone said, what about all the old people who won't buy computers, won't adopt it, won't take up the new technology? He said, they'll die. Right? We advance fastest and farthest as a community when we have that right mixture of respect for others, care for their unfolding, and the willingness for us to become who we have chosen to be. This is, I think, the formula in societies that are moving quickly and strongly